Hey everybody, welcome to episode 10 of Scales Deconstructed. In today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at the fourth mode of melodic minor, also known as the Lydian Dominant Scale. Hope you enjoy. Okay, so first off, we want to go over what is happening intervallically in a Lydian dominant scale. So it's just like it says in the title. It's a Lydian scale, but dominant, so that means we flat the 7 as opposed to a major 7. And I'm going to be doing this in the key of G. So going up in the key of G intervallically, we have 1, 2, 3, sharp 4, 5, 6, flat 7, and then 8. Alright, so this is meant to be used over a dominant 7 chord. And the main type of chord that this scale would function over is like a dominant 7, flat 5, sharp. I guess I would call it sharp 11 because we already have a 5th in the scale. But this chord right here. Okay, so for part 1, we are going to go over the scale in intervals. We're going to go from thirds all the way up to sevenths in a couple of different patterns. And as always, if you would like PDFs of everything that I go over today with an additional 2 patterns per interval and arpeggio not covered in the video, you can go over to patreon.com/MikeGaudetMusic. So we're going to start out by going up the scale in thirds. So I'm going to take each note of the scale and I'm going to play the note a third higher within the scale. So starting on G, then if I go up 3, G, A, B, B would be my third. So G to B, and then I just continue that through the scale. So then I start on A, then do C sharp, then go to B, and then so on. So if I run that through the scale, I get this. Backwards. Okay, now I'm going to alternate the pattern. I'm going to go down the first set of notes, but then instead of going down the second set of notes, I'm going to go up instead. So now if I run that through the scale, I get this. Backwards. Okay, now for the next set of intervals, we want to be able to do the same thing, but go up the scale in fourths. Now these get a little bit trickier because we have 2 sets of tritones that naturally occur in any mode that happens in the melodic minor scale. And it actually happens with the first set of notes, right? So if we start on G and go up a fourth in the scale, G, A, B, C sharp, we actually get this augmented fourth or tritone, whatever you prefer to call it. So if we take the fourths now and run it through the scale, we get this. Now backwards. Now I'm going to go down the first one and up the second one like I did with the previous pattern. So instead of I go. Now if I run that through the fourths, I get this. Backwards. Okay, now the next set of intervals we would have is fifths. So if I take the G note and I go up the 5th note of the scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, get G to D. If I run that ascending through the scale, I get this. Backwards. Now if I go down the first one up the second one, we get this. Backwards. Okay, for the next interval, we want to do sixths. So we take the G note and go to the sixth note of the scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, G to E. If we run that through the scale, we get this. Backwards. Now if we go down the first one up the second one, we get this. Backwards. Okay, for the last interval, we will do sevenths. So we take the G note, we run up to the seventh note of the scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, G to F. And if we run that through the scale, we get this. Backwards. Now if we go down the first one up the second one, we get this. Backwards. All right, and I think that the sevenths are, a particularly good exercise for the left hand and the right hand, because you're always going to have a string jump. And sevenths in general, at least for me, I always use more than one finger. Like minor seventh intervals, I always find a little bit awkward just barring the pointer finger or just lifting it, or doing the same thing with any other finger, whether it be the ring or the middle or the pinky. So typically whenever I'm doing minor sevenths, I like to use two different fingers. For me, it's just easier to execute it more cleanly that way. But in general, I think, the sevenths and all the others, it's just great exercises for understanding the inner workings of these scales, noticing different interval groupings that you like the sound of against the tonality. And great for your right hand, great for your left hand, just all around great exercises for knowing the inner workings of scales. So that concludes part one. Now we will move on to part two, where we want to be able to run up and down the scale in arpeggios. So what we're doing here is we're taking each note of the scale and building the third and fifth off of it to make an arpeggio. So if we start with our G note, we do the first, third, and fifth, we just get a G major, so the one chord would be major. Now if we start on A, we do the 1, 3, 5, we get A major, so the 2 is major as well, which is the same with Lydian, right? So we haven't differentiated from Lydian at any point yet, right? The first two arpeggios are the same. 1 is major, 2 is major. Now the 3 is where it's going to change. So B, D, F, we actually get a diminished. The 3 is diminished now. In regular Lydian, it would be minor, right? Because we have the F sharp, but with the F natural, lower it, make it diminished. So major, major, diminished. And then we're going to do the C sharp. We have another diminished. So the 3 and the sharp 4 are both diminished. Okay, and then the 5 is going to be minor. 6 is minor. And then the flatted 7th is augmented. But that's my favorite one in the whole scale. And then back to the 1, which is major again. So 1 is major, 2 is major, 3 is diminished, sharp 4 is diminished, 5 is minor, 6 is minor, flat 7 is augmented, and then back to 1. All right, so if we go down that, we have backwards. Okay, and if you head over to the Patreon, I also include these exercises with 7th arpeggios as well, which are really colorful. But that concludes part 2. Now for the final section, part 3, we want to be able to go up and down the scale in dyads. So all dyads are 2 notes played at the same time. So what I'm doing is taking all of the interval exercises that I did in part 1, and rather than playing them as single notes, I'm going to play them at the same time as 2-note groupings. And I'm also including it with seconds as well, which will be the first pattern. So for seconds, we start with the G note, and then we want to take the second note of the scale, which is A, play them at the same time, and then run that through the scale. So if we take that pattern and run it through the scale, we get this. the same thing with thirds, we get this. Now fourths. Now fifths. Now sixths. And finally sevenths. All right, so a lot of stuff that we went over between the intervals, arpeggios, and the dyads, but I think that is a really good starting point to really get to know any scale that you're trying to get more and more familiar with. Just getting to know the inner workings, everything that's happening within the scales intervallically, arpeggio-wise, and then being able to do the dyads might just give you some new insight into some cool, two-note groupings that you may not have thought of before that are happening within the scale. So that is it. That is our episode for this week. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned something. And like I said, if you would like to check out the PDFs of everything that we went over with the additional 2 patterns per interval and arpeggio and the dyads, you can head over to patreon.com/MikeGaudetteMusic. That's our episode for this week. Thank you for watching and I will see you at the next episode. Take care.